So now we're going to look at different regulatory options for maintaining environmental compliance. And the first is what we call command and control regulation. Sometimes that pen just does its own thing. And command and control regulation is one that gives the least amount of latitude to the firms. And because of that lack of control, it is a cause of a significantly high pollution abatement cost. Now, there's some advantages and disadvantages of command and control regulation. Basically, it means that a law is passed and firms must comply with that law, period, end of discussion. No negotiation, no flexibility, no room, period. The good thing about that is the standards are uniform and they are extremely predictable. And there is an amount of equity in applying the same rules to all firms in the industry. You will do X, Y, and Z with regards to the environment. Matter closed. Of course, it also lets the public know that the EPA is watching and regulating firms. So it gives government a degree of legitimacy in the eyes of society. But it can also be somewhat inefficient because it just increases the cost of complying with regulation, and it may or may not be commensurate with the respective increases in benefits. So the government can just say, you will comply with this new regulation. The firm is, of course, scrambling to do so, and of course it's not necessarily in the interest of that firm. We also have market incentive regulation. And market incentive regulation gives polluting firms financial motives to control pollution, but it also gives them some degree of flexibility in how these reductions are achieved. So one thing that they could do is firms that are heavy polluters can pay an additional environmental tax. So that gives them incentive that over the long run, they should reduce the amount of pollution that they generate in order to save money on those taxes. And of course, there are also things like cap and trade. Some of you have probably heard of this. Cap and trade basically means that all firms have a cap on the amount of pollution that they can generate. If they generate more pollution than what is allowed by the cap, they can buy carbon offsets in the market. So if you've got, let's use a power plant, for example. The government can say, per kilowatt hour of energy, you can only emit this amount of carbon. Okay? So if a firm has an old coal power plant that's way above that limit, they can look to a solar manufacturer or solar plant that has a very low amount of carbon or pollution that is generating, and so therefore they're not really using any of their carbon offsets. So the coal plant can sell, so to speak, the right to pollute more because the solar power plant is not polluting as much, and that solar power plant gets extra money from the coal power plant because it's not polluting at all. And that encourages the coal power plant in the long run to pollute less so they don't have to keep giving money away to competitors. Of course, it's a complicated system, and some people think it's a little ridiculous. And of course, there's also information disclosure. Firms can be required to disclose how much they pollute to the public, and so that the public, ideally, consumers, would buy other products from firms that pollute less. Then, of course, there's voluntary regulation. And voluntary regulation doesn't have any compulsion or sanction. And if a firm signs up for a voluntary program, there are certain reporting requirements, but there's no really enforcement if they fail to meet goals. But it's usually in a company's interest to do so. First of all, it gives consumers a degree of faith in that firm. I would rather buy from that manufacturing firm that pollutes less because I care about the environment than the firm that pollutes more. So it gives you a variety, a degree of competitive advantage with regards to your customers. Furthermore, if they think that certain kinds of regulation are imminent, if a firm thinks a certain kind of environmental regulation is imminent, why not comply voluntarily now, use it as a competitive advantage, and when the regulation passes, bam, other firms are struggling to keep up, whereas the firm that has already complied voluntarily is in the lead. Furthermore, there are non-regulatory pressures for companies that need to be environmentally responsible. As I mentioned, consumers may wish to buy products exclusively from environmentally friendly companies. And there's a lot of these labels that are voluntary, examples of voluntary regulation: Energy Star, Green Power Partnership, WasteWise, Natural Gas Star, CHP Partnership, Landfill Methane Outreach Program, Smart Way Transport, Best Workplaces for Commuters, Coal Bed Methane Outreach Program. The point is, it lets consumers know that this is an environmentally friendly firm and they're doing so voluntarily. It's all about competitive advantage. Generally speaking, what I would leave you with is you have a variety of policies as a firm with regards to managing environmental quality. And of course you can take precautionary action, so be ahead of the curve, comply more than what regulation demands, which is usually the best approach. You can try to prevent pollution if you wish, but that may be difficult. There's always ways to analyze your products internally so that you can correct the problems before the public finds out about them. And of course, if you are environmentally compliant, use it as a competitive advantage to generate environmental marketing campaigns and let your consumers know about all the great things you're doing. Use it to generate sustained competitive advantage. Hope you've enjoyed this lecture on the environment. We've got still a few more modules ahead for this course, and I'm looking forward to seeing you then.